Chapter 1. The Rejection. The Valorian world was a place of perfect symmetry. The sprawling cities gleamed under the twin suns, their architecture a marvel of engineering and artistry. Towers of crystalline stone reached towards the sky, their sharp edges cutting through the atmosphere with the elegance of a dancer. The land, vast and verdant, stretched endlessly, broken only by the majestic mountain ranges and the gentle, sweeping rivers that fed the fertile soil. The Valorians had lived in this paradise for eons, evolving not only to match the beauty of their surroundings, but to embody it in every facet of their being. Their physical form was their pride, a symbol of their evolutionary superiority, and they had perfected it with every generation. In Valoria, beauty was more than an aesthetic, it was an imperative. The species had long since mastered the art of biological perfection, crafting their bodies to be the ultimate expression of physical prowess and grace. Each generation brought forth new refinements, small but significant tweaks to their genetics to maintain an ideal of strength, agility, and symmetrical beauty. It was an unspoken rule. Those who did not conform to this standard were outcasts, anomalies destined to fade into obscurity. And then there was Lyanna. Her body was, by all measures, too big. Her muscles rippled beneath her skin, and her bones were denser, more robust than any Valorian had ever known. Where others possessed a delicate balance of strength and grace, Lyanna had been born with a forceful, almost primal physicality. She stood taller than her peers, her broad shoulders and long limbs making her appear like an ancient warrior rather than a delicate offspring of the race. The Valorians saw her as a failure, a grotesque flaw in their pursuit of perfection. It wasn't her fault, of course. Lyanna had been born into this world with every intention of fitting in, of becoming part of the harmonious whole that Valoria had cultivated for millennia. But her form had betrayed her. Her body was too large, too muscular, too different from what was considered the pinnacle of Valorian beauty. And as time passed, the elders of Valoria began to whisper among themselves. They feared that Lyanna's existence would disrupt the delicate balance of their society, that her presence might cause a rift in the natural order that had made them the envy of the galaxy. Lyanna's mother, a woman of unparalleled beauty and elegance, had carried the weight of this societal failure in silence. She had watched as her daughter grew, her body expanding, her muscles thickening, her stature towering over the other children. It was clear from the beginning that Lyanna would never fit into the mold that Valoria had so carefully shaped. And when the time came for the rite of reproduction, when each Valorian female was tested for her ability to bear children, Lyanna's fate was sealed. The rite was the most sacred tradition in Valorian culture. It was an event of great importance, one that every female Valorian underwent once they reached their prime. It was a demonstration of their worth, a public declaration of their ability to carry on the legacy of the Valorian people. Those who passed the rite were deemed fit to reproduce, their genetic material coveted for the continuation of their race. Those who failed were cast aside, their futures stripped of all meaning. Lyanna, like many before her, had been tested. The ritual was nothing more than a formal declaration of what everyone already knew. Her body, though strong, could never bear children in the traditional way. Her size, her form, it was an obstacle to the very nature of reproduction. The genetic test had confirmed what the Valorian Council feared. Her body was simply too large to conform to the established norms of their species' reproduction. The delicate genetic balance of their race, the fragile harmony between strength and beauty, had been shattered by her very existence. And so, they cast her out. It was not a public trial, not a spectacle meant to shame her before the world. No, that would have been too cruel, even for the Valorians. Instead, they offered her a quiet exile, a slow, subtle rejection. She was dismissed from the reproductive pools and sent away to live on the outskirts of Valoria, in a place where those who did not fit could find their own way, in isolation, far from the eyes of the world. To be cast out was to be forgotten. But Lyanna was not the type to fade into obscurity. In the desolate outskirts of the city, where the mountains met the vast stretches of desert and scrubland, she found herself alone. The air was dry here, filled with the scent of sand and stone. The once thriving city that had surrounded her now seemed like a distant memory, a cruel reminder of the place she could no longer belong. She had been given a small house, a modest dwelling carved into the side of the hills, with enough space to live, but little more. It was a life of solitude, a life where no one would ever care about her physicality, where she could live without the judgment of her people. Yet, even here, she could feel the weight of their rejection, the silence of their disapproval echoing in every corner of the space she now called home. Lyanna had tried to push the pain aside, to live as she always had, strong, independent, and unbowed. But it was impossible to ignore the nagging ache that gnawed at her heart. She wasn't just a failure in the eyes of her people. She was a failure in her own eyes as well. Every day, she would look at the mirror, at her towering reflection, and wonder why she was so different. Why had her body betrayed her? Why couldn't she be like the others? Why couldn't she carry the legacy of Valoria like every other female? But the truth was, she could never change. She could never return to the world she had once known. The elders had decided. And in Valoria, the decision of the elders was absolute. It was on one such day, as the sun dipped low on the horizon and the shadows stretched long across the desert floor, that her life would change forever. She was walking along the edge of the cliffs that overlooked the wasteland below when she saw it. A small, battered ship, barely able to stay afloat, descending through the orange-tinted sky. It was the kind of ship she had only heard of in old stories, the type of vessel that didn't belong in Valoria, but in the far-off reaches of the galaxy, among the stars where no one knew or cared about the rules of her world. The ship crash-landed in the sand, kicking up a storm of dust and debris. Without thinking, Lyanna rushed towards it, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and fear. She didn't know what had brought the ship here, or what kind of beings might be aboard. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope, something to fill the emptiness that had gnawed at her since her exile. She reached the ship and saw a figure stumbling out. It was a man, but not one like any she had seen before. His skin was pale, his eyes sharp with an intensity she had never encountered. He was human. The sight of him, the first human she had ever seen, struck her with an unexpected force. His presence was alien, and yet it felt like a sign. This human, this stranger from a distant world, could be the key to her future, the answer to the questions that had haunted her for so long. He had landed in her world by accident, perhaps, but in that moment, it seemed as though fate had brought him here for a reason. Lyanna stepped forward, her massive form towering over him. "Are you lost?" she asked, her voice thick with the uncertainty that had followed her for so long. The man looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence between them, a brief, tense stillness that felt like a world of distance. Then he spoke. "Not lost," he said, his voice rough, as though he hadn't used it in a long time. "Just looking for a place to survive." Lyanna stared at him, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do. Here he was, a human, far from his home, and yet somehow, he had come into her life, into her world, at the very moment when she had been certain she would live the rest of her days in solitude. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could help her change her fate. Because in a world that had cast her aside, in a place where she had once been deemed unworthy, she had now found the one person who might see her for who she truly was. A mother. Lyanna stood in stunned silence, watching the human man struggle to his feet as he wiped sand from his clothes. He was not like the others she had seen in stories or heard about from the rare travelers that passed through Valoria's borders. His appearance was rugged, worn, as if he had seen battles, felt pain, and faced struggles far beyond what her peaceful world had ever known. His eyes, though weary, held a certain depth, a strength that resonated with something Lyanna had longed to see in herself. He steadied himself and then met her gaze, an unspoken understanding passing between them. For a moment, Lyanna could have sworn she felt something stir within her, an unfamiliar pull in her chest. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper, something primal. "You're not from here," she said, her voice still carrying the echoes of isolation. It was a statement more than a question. The man nodded slowly, his hand gripping the side of his ship for support. "No, I'm not. And I don't think I was supposed to land here, either." Lyanna stepped closer, the soft crunch of sand beneath her boots the only sound between them. She felt a strange urge to protect him, even though she knew nothing about him. The instincts of a warrior, bred into her from birth, had never fully faded. Even in her exile, She was still Valorian, still made for strength, and she wasn't about to let a stranger die alone in the wasteland. "Do you need help?" she asked. The man looked at her, assessing her towering form. Despite her imposing stature, he didn't seem afraid. There was something reassuring about his calmness. He offered a weak smile. "I'm fine for now, but could you point me in the direction of shelter? I wasn't expecting the crash landing to go so badly." Lyanna frowned. "Shelter isn't exactly plentiful around here. I live in a place a bit farther out. It's not much, but it's safe. If you need refuge, you can come with me." The man nodded. "I think I might need that, yeah." As they walked together toward her home, Lyanna couldn't help but notice the way the human moved. His gait was slow and labored, as though every step was a reminder of something he had endured. Perhaps he had suffered more than the harsh desert that surrounded them. Perhaps his journey had been much longer than a mere crash landing. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence born from the understanding that neither of them truly knew the other, but both were in need of something. Lyanna, still haunted by her banishment, and the human whose reasons for being here remained a mystery, seemed to have crossed paths for a reason. When they reached the small dwelling carved into the hills, Lyanna led him inside. It was simple, made of stone and wood, with a small fire burning in the center of the room. The air smelled of dust and sand, a stark contrast to the lush forests and towering buildings of Valoria. But to Lyanna, it was home now. The only place she could be herself without the weight of judgment crushing her every move. She gestured for the human to sit on a simple chair by the fire. "Rest. You must be tired." He did as she asked, lowering himself with a groan of exhaustion. His eyes looked around the room, taking in the humble surroundings. "I'm grateful," he said after a pause. This place. It's different, but it's more than I expected when I crash-landed." Lyanna settled down opposite him, her back to the fire. "I've been living here for a while. It's all I know now." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled by her statement. "What do you mean, it's all you know?" Lyanna took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames. It was the first time she had shared her story with anyone since she had been cast out. There had been no need. No one cared. But this human, this stranger, was the first person to show her even a shred of interest. And somehow, she found herself opening up. "I was different from the others. A mistake in their eyes," she said quietly. "My body didn't fit their idea of perfection. I was too big, too strong, not delicate enough to bear children. So they cast me out, sent me away, as if I were some kind of monster." The man's expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "You're no monster." Lyanna chuckled bitterly. "You don't understand. In Valoria, strength is a curse for women. They see it as unnatural, something that disrupts the harmony they've built. A woman's worth is determined by her ability to bear children. My body was too much, too different." The silence between them lingered again, but this time it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of mutual understanding. The human didn't interrupt. He simply listened, his eyes compassionate and kind. And for the first time in a long while, Lyanna felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt seen. Chapter 2. The Encounter. The days that followed were a strange mix of routine and discovery. Lyanna found herself caring for the human in ways she hadn't expected. Despite his apparent survival skills, he had managed to land his ship in one piece. He was still recovering from the crash. His injuries, though not fatal, required attention. He was not one to ask for help, but Lyanna could see the strain in his movements, the way he winced every time he moved his arm or shifted in his seat. He introduced himself as Marcus. He was a traveler, someone who had come from a distant planet, though he didn't share much more than that. His story, like his past, seemed guarded. He spoke only of the present, of the here and now, of survival. It was as if he, too, was running from something. But what? Lyanna didn't press him for answers. In many ways, they were alike. Both of them were trying to survive in worlds that hadn't been kind to them. And in this quiet, remote corner of Valoria, they found themselves becoming a strange, unspoken family. Lyanna cared for him, tended to his wounds, ensured he was well fed, and shared her sparse life with him. And in return, Marcus did what he could to help with the tasks that were beyond her reach, like repairing her home when parts of it began to erode in the harsh desert winds. The bond between them deepened. Lyanna had not expected this, had not expected the human to be so understanding. so patient. And yet, there were moments, fleeting ones, where she could feel the stirrings of something more. He wasn't just a visitor, not just a survivor. He had become a part of her life in a way that no one else ever had. But what troubled her most was the way he looked at her sometimes, almost as if he saw her for something more than just the outcast of Valoria. There were moments when his gaze softened, when his lips parted to say something, and then he would stop, as if he were afraid to speak the words that lingered on the edge of his tongue. Lyanna felt the weight of those unspoken words pressing against her chest. She didn't know what they meant, didn't know how to interpret them. And yet, deep down, she felt an odd sense of hope flicker within her, a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel for a long time. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Marcus spoke. "I don't know why I'm here, Lyanna. I don't know why I ended up on this planet, but I think I'm meant to be here. To help you." Lyanna looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never heard him speak like this before. There was a sense of conviction in his voice that both confused and stirred her. "Help me?" she asked quietly. "How?" Marcus met her gaze, his expression intense. "By showing you that you're not alone, that you're not some mistake. You're more than your body, Lyanna. More than what they told you." Lyanna's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected him to say this, not now. Not after everything she had been through. But for the first time, she allowed herself to believe him. For the first time, she felt the possibility of something more than loneliness, something she had not dared to dream of in the darkest corners of her heart. And in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than the outcast. She could be a mother. Days stretched into weeks as Marcus and Lyanna settled into a routine that, despite the isolation of their surroundings, seemed almost normal. The desert wind howled outside her home, but within its stone walls, a fragile peace had taken root. Their conversations became deeper, more intimate, as they shared not just their stories but their hopes and fears. Lyanna had never allowed herself to dream of a future beyond exile, beyond the shame that her people had cast upon her. She had buried the part of her that had once longed for a family, a life beyond her solitary existence. But as she sat by the fire with Marcus, listening to him speak about his travels, about the things he had seen in the galaxy, a spark of something long dormant inside her began to flicker. Marcus spoke of faraway planets, of civilizations teeming with life, of ships that flew through the stars at unimaginable speeds. He told her of people who embraced differences, of races where strength wasn't a curse but a blessing, where beauty was not confined to a narrow ideal. Lyanna listened intently, her heart both heavy and light. He had seen so much, and yet here he was, with her, in this desolate corner of Valoria. "Is it really true?" Lyanna asked one evening as they watched the twin moons rise in the sky. "That there are places where people like me exist?" Marcus turned to her, his brow furrowing slightly. "Places where you belong? Absolutely. Everywhere I've been, there's someone who fits in. No one's perfect, Lyanna, but every flaw has a place. Every difference has its value. I don't know what happened on Valoria, but you're not some mistake. You're strong, you're capable, and that's something to be proud of." His words were like balm to her wounded soul. For so long, Lyanna had been told that her body, her very existence, was an aberration, that she was too much for Valoria, that she could never be accepted. But here, in the presence of a stranger, a human no less, she heard a truth she had never dared to hope for, that perhaps she wasn't the problem at all. As the days passed, the bond between them deepened. They trained together, Lyanna showing Marcus how to survive in the harsh desert, and in turn, he shared with her his knowledge of the stars, of ships, of things she had never dreamed possible. They spoke about everything and nothing, sometimes sitting in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. But it wasn't just the exchange of words that grew between them. There were the moments when their eyes met, lingering longer than necessary, when the air between them seemed to hum with an unspoken understanding. Lyanna couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It was a longing she had buried beneath layers of rejection, a longing that, for the first time in years, seemed to resurface with each passing day. One evening, as they sat beneath the vast sky, the wind howling around them, Marcus broke the silence. "Lyanna, he hesitated, as if the words were caught in his throat. He looked away, down at the ground, his hands clenched into fists. I don't know what's happening between us, but there's something here. Something I can't ignore. Lyanna's heart skipped a beat. She had felt it too, the slow burn that had started to spread through her chest. But she hadn't dared to name it. Not yet. I don't know what you mean, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the warmth rising in her cheeks. Marcus met her gaze, his eyes dark with something unspoken. I can't explain it, Lyanna, but I don't want to leave this place. Not now. Not after everything. After meeting you. Her breath hitched. She had been trying to ignore the way her body responded to him, the way her heart raced when he was near, the way she longed to be close to him, to feel his touch. She had buried those desires for so long, afraid of the rejection that might follow if she let herself feel anything at all. But Marcus was different. He wasn't like the others. He didn't care about the size of her body, the shape of her form. He saw her for who she truly was. And in that moment, she understood. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here because, just like her, he had found something worth living for. And she had found it in him. Before she could speak, he leaned forward, his lips brushing against hers in a tentative kiss. It was soft, uncertain, but it sent a jolt of warmth through Lyanna's body. She kissed him back, her hands trembling as she cupped his face, feeling the roughness of his skin, the heat of his body against hers. In that kiss, she felt something stir deep inside her, something she hadn't known she still had the capacity to feel. For a moment, the world around them disappeared. There was no Valoria, no exile, no shame. There was only the heat between them, the connection that had formed like a thread weaving through their hearts. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless, eyes wide with the intensity of what had just transpired. Lyanna didn't know what this meant, what the future held for them. She didn't know if she was ready to face the consequences of her actions, or if Marcus would stay with her when the time came for him to leave. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't destined to live alone forever. Hope that she could be more than the outcast, more than the mistake. Hope that she could be a mother, after all. Chapter 3, The Promise. Weeks passed, and the relationship between Lyanna and Marcus grew stronger, more profound. They had become inseparable, partners not only in survival, but in every sense of the word. The outside world had ceased to matter, the judgment of her people a distant memory. With Marcus by her side, Lyanna felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. But even as their connection deepened, the shadow of her past lingered, threatening to pull them apart. One day, while repairing the roof of her small dwelling, Lyanna found herself gazing at the horizon, lost in thought. The weight of her past hung heavily on her, reminding her that she could never truly escape the stigma of being an outcast. She had been exiled for a reason because her body didn't fit the mold of what Valorians considered perfect. And though Marcus made her feel seen, valued, and loved, she couldn't ignore the nagging fear that their relationship would be seen as an abomination in the eyes of Valoria. Marcus climbed up beside her, brushing the dust from his hands as he joined her on the roof. He could sense the unease in her, the tension that always seemed to settle around her when she thought too much about her past. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly, his voice carrying a warmth that comforted her. Lyanna took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. "I've been thinking a lot. About Valoria. About what I left behind. I'm not like the others. My body, it's too much for them. I don't know how to reconcile that with what we have." Marcus's gaze softened, and he reached out to gently touch her arm. "You don't have to reconcile anything. You're not alone anymore, Lyanna. You don't have to hide from who you are. I see you for who you truly are, strong, beautiful, capable. And I love you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lyanna's heart swelled in her chest as she gazed into Marcus's eyes. He had no idea the magnitude of what he had just said, but in that moment, it meant everything. It was the validation she had longed for her entire life. And it was the first step towards something she had never thought possible. Lyanna's voice was barely a whisper. Could we have a future? Together? Despite everything. Marcus smiled, his eyes filled with love and determination. "We'll build our future, Lyanna. Together. No matter what anyone says, no matter where we have to go, I'll be by your side." For the first time in her life, Lyanna allowed herself to believe in a future. A future where she wasn't cast aside, where her size and strength weren't seen as flaws, but as the very things that made her who she was. A future where she could be a mother, surrounded by love, surrounded by a family. And perhaps, just perhaps, this human had come into her life for a reason. The weeks following Marcus's declaration were a whirlwind of emotions for Lyanna. She had always kept her heart guarded, afraid of getting too close to anyone, afraid of the inevitable rejection that had followed her throughout her life. But now, with Marcus by her side, something shifted within her. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel something more than the weight of her past, the weight of her exile. She felt loved. She felt accepted. She felt whole. The days began to blur together as they worked side by side, creating a life that neither of them had ever expected. Marcus taught her about his people's ways, about the technology of his ship, about the stars and the wonders of the universe. In turn, Lyanna showed him how to survive in the harsh desert, how to live off the land, how to endure the extreme heat and the violent winds that whipped through the barren plains. But there was something else that had been stirring inside Lyanna. As the days passed, she began to realize that her desire for Marcus went beyond mere companionship. She wanted something more. She wanted the family that had always been denied to her. She wanted the chance to be a mother not just to herself, but to a child she could raise with Marcus, to create a future that would be different from the one she had been forced to accept. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a vibrant orange, Lyanna sat beside Marcus, their fingers intertwined. The desert was calm tonight, the usual winds replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to echo through the empty spaces around them. "Do you ever think about the future?" she asked, her voice soft, barely audible over the distant hum of the desert. Marcus turned to her, his face lit by the warm glow of the setting sun. "I think about it every day. With you." Lyanna's heart fluttered in her chest. She had never allowed herself to consider a future beyond the boundaries of her exile, but now, with Marcus, the future seemed possible. "What do you see when you think about it?" He took a deep breath, his eyes thoughtful. "I see us together. Maybe on a new planet. Somewhere where you don't have to hide who you are, where your strength is celebrated instead of feared. I see a family, with children." Lyanna's breath caught in her throat. The thought of it, the possibility of being a mother, was overwhelming. It was something she had been taught to believe was impossible for someone like her. But Marcus didn't see her the way Valoria had. He saw her as someone who could create, who could nurture, who could love. "I never thought it could be possible," Lyanna whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Not for someone like me." Marcus gently cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with compassion. "You're everything I've ever wanted, Lyanna. You're more than enough. And I believe you'll be a wonderful mother." The words settled deep within her, and for the first time, Lyanna allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had always dreamed of. A life with Marcus. A life filled with love, with hope, and with a future that was hers to create. Chapter 4. The New Beginning. Months passed, and the small home that Lyanna had built for herself and Marcus in the desert began to feel more like a home in every sense of the word. They had made it their own, decorating it with trinkets and objects from Marcus's travels, filling it with warmth and laughter. The desert no longer felt like a place of isolation, but a sanctuary, a place where they could be free from the judgments of the past. One evening, as they sat together, gazing up at the stars, Lyanna felt a familiar stir in her heart. A feeling she had thought would never come to fruition, but now, she knew it was real. She placed her hand gently on her stomach, a secret she had kept from Marcus until now, but one she knew was ready to be shared. "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling with anticipation. "There's something I need to tell you." He turned to her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What's wrong?" Lyanna smiled softly, her heart swelling with love. "I'm pregnant, Marcus. We're going to have a child." The words hung in the air for a moment before Marcus's face broke into the widest grin. He reached for her, pulling her into an embrace that was both tender and strong, as if he was holding on to something precious. Something that was theirs. "A child," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Lyanna, this is everything. You and me, we're going to be parents. We're going to have a family." Tears welled in Lyanna's eyes as she held him tighter. She had never imagined that her body, so long rejected by her people, could create something so beautiful, so full of life. And yet here she was, carrying a child, a new beginning. For the first time in her life, she felt at peace with who she was. She was no longer an outcast, no longer the flawed one. She was a mother, and with Marcus by her side, she had found a family of her own. As the days passed and her belly grew round with their child, Lyanna and Marcus spoke of their future, of the places they would go, the worlds they would see, and the life they would build together. They no longer had to hide from their pasts or their people. They were free. Free to create a life full of love, acceptance, and hope. And as the baby kicked inside her, Lyanna knew that everything had led to this moment. The rejection, the exile, the loneliness, all of it had brought her here, to this quiet desert home, to Marcus, and to the child they would raise together. She had found her place in the universe, not in the eyes of Valoria or anyone else, but in the love she had found with Marcus. And that was enough.